Is ReLoad actually a masterpiece of experimentation, or was it the beginning of the end of Metallica we all loved? For years, Metallica fans have been arguing whether ReLoad was the peak of the band's 90s evolution or just a collection of glorified B-sides. So today, in honor of its massive remaster re-release, let's peel back the layers of the body fluids era of Metallica to find out why ReLoad was actually so misunderstood by the fans and might be the most necessary and the most pivotal chapter in the Metallica history. Here you go. Super quick guys, as always, please do not hesitate to comment on anything you hear or see in this video, and especially if you disagree with me, because the whole point of our Do You Want Heavy series is of course to start a conversation. But alright, let's do it. Truth be told, ReLoad wasn't your typical Metallica release. I mean, first of all, it was never even meant to be a standalone release. As most Metallica fans of course know, originally Load was conceived as a massive double album. Similar to Judas Priest's Twin Turbos, which later on was separated into Turbo and Ram It Down, with all the songs recorded in those marathon sessions with Bob Rock between May 1995 and February of 1996, of which I feel like there is no point of getting into details in this particular episode, since I did talk about it quite extensively in our Load episode and in our Bob Rock video as well, which, by the way, you should watch if you haven't seen them after watching this video. But in a nutshell, as Kirk Hammett later on explained, a double album would have been too much to digest for a listener, and honestly, too much time in the studio. And that's exactly why the band decided to separate them into two different albums. Which, to this very day, I actually think is quite ironic, given that even like this, both Load and ReLoad actually were the longest Metallica records released by then, with nearly 79 minutes of music on Load and 76 minutes and 4 seconds on ReLoad, and remain such all the way until 2016 and the release of Metallica's Hardwired to Self-Destruct album that had finally beat those records. So can you imagine how massive that album would have been? And how criticized it would have been if it would have come out as a double release back in the 1990s. But even then, although the band decided to split the release into two, James Hetfield insisted they remain twins, which of course you can see in pretty much everything related to that era, including the album's artworks. As just like Load, the ReLoad cover was created by Andres Serrana, this time using a mixture of blood and urine instead of that other liquid substance that Load had, and was once again part of his Body Fluids series, forever linking these two records in a way that to this very day still makes most Metallica fans turn their heads. A popular misconception is that ReLoad featured all of the songs left unfinished after the Load release, which, in my opinion, is slightly misleading, as if we're being very honest, all of those tracks weren't exactly leftovers. These were the tracks that felt darker, heavier, and in some cases almost thrashy, and in some capacity almost reminiscent of the band's classic roots to make it on the experimental Load, with a couple of tracks even bringing back that speed and aggression that many fans felt was missing on the first album. You know, like that one, for example. Give me two, give me five, give me that one, tell us out! And so, first and foremost, no, those weren't exactly the B-sides. Those weren't the songs that were not good enough to make it on Load, but rather the tracks that felt like they musically did not exactly belong on the 1996 release. And after living with those songs for 2 years, the band returned to the studio to push their gear to the absolute limit, finishing up and polishing each and every one of those tracks, and embracing quite a lot of new technology in the studio, including the whole innovation of fixing the drums, which, by the way, even back then, James Hetfield didn't entirely agree with. As, by just putting it in plain words, James believed that they simply should have played better and have done a couple of more takes, instead of wasting their time trying to edit things on computer.
Just trying something different is probably a better way to go. You know, the success of the Black record, it will never top that. I mean, why try?
But no, that combination of having songs that the band has been sitting on for a couple of years, which, by the way, is something that this band has never had before, having the time to really think those through, and having an opportunity to, well, edit things on computer, resulted in, no matter what anyone may say, ReLoad being one of the most polished records this band has released by then, and possibly all the way until today. As no matter what you personally think about the composition of songs on that album, although you do know that I'm a huge fan of ReLoad, I think pretty much everyone may agree that sound-wise, that album was pretty much flawless. By the way guys, super quick, just have to point out that only around 30% of the people who watch my videos are actually subscribed to this channel, so if you're not one of those, and especially if this is not the first video you're watching here, I would really, and I mean like really appreciate it if you would consider subscribing right now. Let's continue building this amazing heavy metal community together. And so ironically, with ReLoad being the second album of the series of 2, it actually also became the album of lasts and firsts, being first of all, well, the last one of the Load series, and the last ever Metallica record recorded on analog, as its follow-up, Saint Anger, would be the band's first fully digitally recorded record. And at the same time, it still opened the gates to an absolutely new chapter of Metallica, with it, as already mentioned, being the first Metallica album on which they did quite a lot of editing after the recordings, with it being the first one on which they started stretching the limits of what a guitar and amp can do, it being the album on which they continued pushing the boundaries of their own sound and introduced even more new styles into the sound of Metallica as we know it, and of course it being the very first album on which Metallica finally introduced a female guest vocalist. As yes, while working on The Memory Remains, James envisioned a story about a fading movie star who thinks she's still in her prime. Spoiler alert, she's not. And in order to make it sound believable, they needed a beam-through-it-all voice, for which producer Bob Rock suggested inviting Marianne Faithfull, an English singer who first rose to prominence with the As Tears Goes By single in 1964 and eventually became one of the leading female singers in the United States during the British invasion era.
I sit and watch the children.
According to James, they met with Marianne in Dublin, Ireland, during the band's stop there while being on the Load tour. And as the story goes, after a pretty loud night at the bar, they all went straight to Windmill Studios to record the eerie vocals we hear today, and which, by the way, to this very day remains one of the most sing-along friendly tunes this band has ever written. Oh, but by the way, there were actually rumors that Metallica was originally going to invite somebody else for that role, with the band seriously considering Carly Simon, Patti Smith, or Johnny Mitchell for the position, yet after Bob Rock suggested Marianne Faithfull, both James and Lars Ulrich simply could not imagine the song with anybody else on guest vocals. And you know what? I 100% agree with them on that one. ReLoad was finally released on November 10th in 1997, and just as Metallica usually does after releasing their albums, the band of course embarked on a massive touring Me tour in support of the record, heading among the other countries Australia, New Zealand, Korea, Japan, and of course the United States. And no matter what anyone may say about ReLoad, well, it was a huge success back in 1997. At least financially, hitting #1 positions in pretty much every major chart, including Billboard 200, with the only exception being the UK officials album charts, at which it peaked at only #4 position back then, despite both Black Album and Load, of course, hitting #1. Yet despite ReLoad being a commercial monster, the response was quite mixed. And if we're being very honest, it was actually quite mixed from both critics and the fans. While Caught from Chicago Tribune praised James Hetfield for his most varied and nuanced performances ever, Stephen Erlewine from AllMusic, while pointing that Sound Sounds successfully pushed the outer edges of the band's sound, said that ReLoad had way too many filler tracks that prevented the album from being a full success. And in addition to that, Metallica fans themselves, who, although by then of course were quite used to Metallica experimenting with their sound, still by far not all of them embraced those changes. And come on, even James Hetfield himself looks back with a bit of what if on it, famously calling it the U2 version of Metallica, and even saying that if Cliff Burton had been alive, he would have been an ally against reinvented the band in this way. But at the same time, well, if I'm being very honest, when it comes to me, I simply love ReLoad. And I'm not ashamed to admit it. It was the first current Metallica album which I was able to purchase with my own money. It was the album which I listened to simply on repeat. Possibly the second most listened album by me when I was a teenager after Ride the Lightning, which to this very day remains my favorite Metallica record, and to this very day I actually love it in its entirety. And yes, hearing Fixer finally being played live at the 40th anniversary concert in San Francisco, right before the terrible events in my home country, Ukraine, of course, started, was in fact one of the most important events of my journey as a Metallica fan. So yeah, no matter what anyone would say, given the whole fact that ReLoad was a bit of a mix of both Load and their early stuff, while at the same time opening gates to an absolutely new chapter of this band, I feel like today this is one of those albums that pretty much every Metallica fan can find at least something to enjoy in. Yet at the same time, if we're being very honest, the real and most important impact of ReLoad being the culmination of the Load era was not music, but rather the cracks that formed in the foundation of this band. As yes, it was since 1995 that Jason Newsted had been working on his own music at his Chop House studio, when he, among other things, started collaborating with other artists and recording his other stuff, which, as we all know, James and Lars weren't exactly fans of.
If Voivod are on the same bill as Metallica, Metallica aren't playing.
Right, that's exactly what I said. You're right. I didn't even know he was in Voivod.
He didn't even know he was in Voivod. I love it.
And the craziest thing is that after an enormous financial success of both Load and ReLoad, that rift between Jason and the rest of the band only widened, with Jason of course eventually establishing a more alternative-oriented band, Ecobrain, which was ironically formed with musicians he met during the writing sessions for this album. And the rest is of course history, which I don't think that there's any point in reciting in this particular episode. But at the same time, I would actually have to argue that if not for the experimental direction that Metallica has taken on Load and ReLoad, possibly even more so on ReLoad, who knows, maybe Jason Newsted would never have felt an urge to form something completely different from what he was doing in Metallica. And who knows, maybe in 2001 interview with Playboy, Newsted would never have expressed an idea to release an album with his new band. And maybe the history of Metallica would have actually been completely different. So is ReLoad one of, if not the strongest Metallica record? Well, no. I mean, I don't think that anyone in their sane mind can say that from the beginning until the end it is stronger than Ride the Lightning or Master of Puppets. Even I, being a fan of this album. But at the same time, I actually truly believe that it might be the most misunderstood Metallica record. And yes, much more so than even Saint Anger. As being released in the shade of its predecessor, many people to this very day consider ReLoad to be a collection of B-sides that did not actually make it on Load. When in reality, in my opinion, this is the album with its completely different identity from Load. In fact, I never actually considered it being part of the same saga as Load, and the album that actually opened the gates to an absolutely new era of this band. An era in which they finally found a way to combine their classic thrash metal roots with the musical experiments that they, as musicians, simply had to do in order to A. stay sane, B. stay interested in their music, and C. succeed on their quest to cementing their status as the biggest metal band on the planet. And this, in my opinion, would simply have not been possible without ReLoad. But anyways, what do you guys personally think about ReLoad, and how do you compare it to Load and other Metallica records? Please let us know in the comments. As always, thank you so much for watching this video, guys, and we'll prevail. Slava Ukraini!